In the mid-1980s, former baseball commissioner Bowie Kuhn was dictating his memoir when he stopped cold and said something that sounded less like nostalgia and more like a warning to the future. "We did all of this without ever finding another Mickey Mantle. Sit with that. Major League Baseball had expanded, revenues had surged, television money was reshaping the sport. New stars were everywhere. And yet, in the mind of a commissioner who watched the business of baseball swell into something bigger than it had ever been, the game still hadn't replaced one-man number 7 who wore Yankee pinstripes from 1951 to 1968. Because this wasn't just about what Mantle did, it was about what he represented at the exact moment baseball was becoming an American industry, an exportable piece of culture, a national broadcast product, a symbol that traveled through radios, newspapers, and living room TVs. The league could grow its markets, raise its gates, and negotiate its deals, but it couldn't manufacture another force of nature who felt inevitable the second he stepped onto the field. When Mickey Mantle arrived in 1951, he was given an assignment that should ruined him: replace Joe DiMaggio in center field. For the New York Yankees, that kind of pressure crushes grown men, never mind a 19-year-old kid. But scouts who watched him didn't describe him like a prospect. They described him like an event. Branch Rickey, yes, that Branch Rickey, the executive who signed Jackie Robinson and changed baseball forever, took one look and delivered the highest praise a baseball lifer could offer. "He is the best prospect I've ever seen." Coming from Rickey, that wasn't hype. That was prophecy. Harry Kraft, Mantle's minor league manager, broke it down like he was trying to explain an impossible machine. "He can run, steal bases, throw, hit for average, and hit with power like I've never seen. Just don't put him at shortstop. That's the blueprint of a 5-tool player, rare now." Casey Stengel, never short on theater, stared at the raw ability and saw danger for everyone else. "That kid can hit balls over buildings." And Tommy Henrich, a Yankee legend brought into Coach Mantle, admitted something that almost sounded like surrender. "After just weeks, there isn't any more that I can teach him." Then Stengel said the part that tells you how strange Mantle was: how he didn't fit baseball as normal timeline. He told Sport Magazine he knew Mantle wasn't a big league outfielder yet, and should he had a year of AAA. That was the logical thing. But then Stengel added the line that still reads like a headline: "This kid ain't logical." And that's where the legend begins, not in clean numbers, but in the testimony of people who watched physics bend. Mantle didn't just hit home runs. He hit them in ways that made opponents sound like eyewitnesses after a storm. Jim Busby, an outfielder who played against him, told the Sporting News in 1955, "Mickey Mantle is the strongest hitter in the game. He's the only one who hits the ball so hard he knocks the spin off it. Catching a liner from him is like catching a knuckleball. It flutters all over. Think about that. A ball hit so violently it becomes unpredictable in flight. That isn't just power, that's fear." Frank Crosetti, the Yankees coach, saw Mantle's legendary blast in May 1963 and said, "That is the hardest I've ever seen anyone hit a ball." Jimmy Fox, Ruth, anybody. "I don't believe a man can hit a ball harder." Crosetti had seen the old gods. He was telling you Mantle was louder than them. Broadcaster Mel Allen watched one in May 1956 and practically shouted into history. If not for the roof, it would have hit the subway across the street. Tigers manager Bucky Harris saw Mantle crush one in September 1960 and could only say it would bring tears to the eyes of a rocking chair. And Billy Martin, never one to stay quiet, defended Mantle's distance like it was personal. "When they say Mays hit a ball as far as Mickey, they're smoking something." Here's the part the business side of baseball understood. Even if it never said it out loud, Mantle wasn't just a player. He was the kind of figure who turned the Yankees into a national product. The kind of star who made a kid in another state feel like this team belonged to him too. In an era when the sports economics were shifting more TV exposure, bigger audiences, the early groundwork of the modern sports economy, Mantle became a living advertisement for baseball. As big as promise, that greatness could be seen, felt, and shared in real time. But then the story turns, because the most haunting praise ever given to Mantle might be the simplest. When Mantle retired in 1969, Nellie Fox's rival said something that still lands like a punch: "Onto legs." Mickey Mantle would have been the greatest ball player who ever lived, onto legs. Because in the 1951 World Series, his rookie season, Mantle suffered the knee injury that never truly healed. DiMaggio heard him go down and later said, "I thought he had been shot." For the next 17 seasons, Mickey Mantle played through pain that most people couldn't live through, let alone sprint on, and almost no one saw the full ritual because Mantle didn't want anyone to. He didn't want the pain to become his excuse. That was the thing about Mickey Mantle. Even when his body was betraying him, he refused to let the world see him bargaining with it. Eddie Ford, the son of Whitey Ford, revealed what was really happening behind the curtain. Mickey's not late. He just doesn't want anyone to see him putting those bandages on his legs. He didn't want them to think it was an excuse. So Mantle would arrive after the team had already taken the field, slipping into the ballpark like a man trying to hide evidence. Not evidence of weakness, evidence of humanity. Whitey Ford, who watched him every day, explained what that did to a clubhouse full of champions. He was always hurt, and it really gave an inspiration to the rest of the team. Think about the psychology of that. In a sport built on routine, on repetition, on grinding out the same demands every night, the Yankees weren't just watching their superstar dominate. They were watching him endure, and endurance has a way of spreading. When the best player is limping and still beating you, what excuse does anybody else have? Carl Yastrzemski's opponent, who understood what greatness looked like up close, took one look at the compromised version of Mantle and delivered the kind of statement that makes you feel the alternate universe hovering right beside our own. If that guy were healthy, he'd hit 80 home runs. Mantle finished with 536. But the subtext of his entire career is that he did it at maybe 70% capacity. That's not a statistic. That's a ghost story. It makes people stare at the record book and imagine numbers that don't exist. 700, 800, then realize the tragedy is exactly what makes the legend burn hotter. And behind those superhuman feats was a man who took failure like it was personal humiliation. Yogi Berra, his teammate, his friend, the guy who saw everything, said he was always amazed by how hard Mantle took everything. He remembered a day early in Mickey's career when Mantle struck out 6 times in a doubleheader and started doing the number on the water cooler. Just picture it, the most gifted athlete on the field, raging like the game had exposed him, because in his mind, every strikeout wasn't normal baseball failure. It was a collapse of the standard he demanded from himself. Clete Boyer remembered one line about Mantle that stayed with him for life, something a writer once wrote that captured the strange gravity Mickey carried even among Hall of Famers. Mickey Mantle is a celebrity in his own clubhouse. Think about how rare that is. The Yankees of that era were in some underdog roster, grateful to be there. That room was filled with legends, with rings, with swagger, and still, Mantle stood apart, like even they were watching him the way everyone else did. But what separated him in the eyes of people who faced him wasn't just power, it was humility. Red Sox pitcher Bill Monbouquet noted, "The thing I really liked about Mickey was the way he treated everyone the same." Mantle himself explained something that sounds almost old-fashioned now, like a code from another era. After he hit a home run, he'd run the bases with his head down because he figured the pitcher already felt bad enough without being shown up. Not strategy, not image management, character. And the most meaningful praise, the kind that can't be dismissed as friendly exaggeration, came from opponents who had nothing to gain by giving it. After the 1950 World Series, Jackie Robinson told the Pittsburgh Press, "The kid was great. He was the difference." He added that the Yankees didn't team his Joe DiMaggio in center field, and wouldn't he as long as Mantle was around. Imagine the weight of that, coming from Robinson, who had just lost, who had every reason to offer bitterness instead of respect. Then Robinson went to Mantle directly and said, "You're going to be a great player, kid." That same World Series had a defining moment that feels like a cinematic scene now. Robinson hit a line drive to center and tested Mantle as armed by trying to stretch it into a triple. Mantle fielded it on one hop and threw him out at third. That wasn't just an out. It was a statement. Talent and nerve in one violent, perfect motion. Even Ted Williams, maybe the greatest pure hitter the game ever produced, lost the 1956 batting race to Mantle and admitted something that sounded like envy, dressed up as admiration. "If I could run like Mantle, I'd hit for 100 every year." Williams prided himself on being the best. For him to say that was to acknowledge Mantle's athletic edge as something almost unfair. And then there were the moments when opponents sounded less like competitors and more like people trying to survive an encounter. Harmon Killebrew once watched Mantle catch 3 balls. He hit over 450 feet at Yankee Stadium and asked, "How the hell can you play here?" White Sox pitcher Jack Harshman summed up the frustration in a line that feels like a verdict. "They ought to create a new league for that guy." This is where the Mantle story stops being just baseball and starts becoming American culture, because the sport in the 1950s and 60s was sitting at the intersection of entertainment, television expansion, and post-war consumer confidence. Baseball wasn't only competing on the field, it was competing for national attention in a growing media economy. The Yankees were the sport's biggest brand, and Mantle was the face that made that brand feel inevitable. He wasn't just winning games, he was winning living rooms. He was baseball's early television superstar, the kind of figure who could turn a routine June night into an event, because people felt like something impossible might happen when he stepped up. And in that era, number debate captured the country's attention like the one that never died. Mickey Mantle or Willie Mays. The argument wasn't just sports talk, it was identity talk. It broke out in bars and barber hops and ballparks because it wasn't really about choosing between the center fielders, it was about choosing what kind of greatness you believed in. Willie Mays was electricity, durability, joy, the kind of player who looked like he could do anything on any given night and still be smiling when he did it. Mickey Mantle was something darker and more dramatic, raw power, switch-hitting violets, speed that didn't make sense for his build, and the constant tension of a body held together by will. Both were transcendent. The comparison was inevitable, and the country treated it like a civil war with no casualties, just pride. Mantle himself handled it with the humility that made so many people respect him even more. He said, outside of Joe DiMaggio, Willie Mays is the greatest all-around baseball player of my time. Then he went further, saying if you wanted to know who was better, you had to look at career stats, and Willie's bottom line was better. In another man, that would have sounded like surrender. In Mantle, it sounded like honesty, but others weren't willing to let the conversation end there. Bill James, baseball's premier statistician, looked at the numbers and concluded Mantle was clearly greater in his peak years. He argued that even if you gave Mays every conceivable break on defense, base running, clutch hitting, the performance still wouldn't match Mantle's at his best. Sports writer Red Smith captured the intensity of the debate with a line that felt like America speaking: Snyder, Mantle. At Mays, you could get a fat lip in any saloon starting that argument. And baseball executive Gabe Paul put the knife right where it belonged. He gave Mays the edge and durability. Mickey wasn't sound and Willie was. Otherwise, if he had the chance to trade for either, he'd pick Mantle. There was again the same haunting theme repeated by everyone who knew. If Mantle's body had held, the argument might not have been an argument at all. But baseball doesn't run on if, it runs on what survives. Then came 1961, the season that turned the sport into a national obsession. Roger Maris chased Babe Ruth's single-season home run record, and the media couldn't resist packaging it like a morality play. They tried to manufacture bitterness between Maris and Mantle, painting it like a rivalry inside the same clubhouse. The so-called M&M boys turned into a headline machine. But the truth, according to the people closest to it, was the opposite. Mantle made his feelings clear. Roger Maris was as good a man and as good a ball player as there ever was. He directly confronted the narrative. Writers claimed he and Roger didn't like each other, didn't get along. Nothing could be further from the truth. And as the season wore on, Mantle's injuries pulled him out of the race. That's when the pressure became almost unbearable for Maris, because the chase stopped being shared. It became lonely. Mantle watched what happened to his teammate and described it like a man, still disturbed by what he saw. The strain on Roger was unbelievable. After Mantle dropped out, the reporters had one guy to go after, and they surrounded him everywhere. Mantle said Maris had big clumps of hair falling out. That image matters, because it reveals what the modern sports economy was already becoming. Not just games, but constant surveillance, constant narrative warfare. A player turned into a moving target for media and public expectation. The chase for 61 wasn't only a baseball event, it was an early example of celebrity pressure, before athletes had the protection systems of today. When Maris finally broke Ruth's record, Mantle didn't respond like a man who'd been beaten. He responded like a witness. The greatest thing I ever saw was Roger Maris breaking Babe Ruth's record, and Maris returned that respect in a way that feels almost sacred now. Describing the baseball to Mickey, the greatest of them all. Even broadcaster Mel Allen revealed another layer of the fear factor that shaped that season. When Maris broke Ruth's record, he wasn't intentionally walked once. Why? Because Mickey batted behind him, and nobody wanted to put a man on base with Mantle coming up. So even when Mantle was injured, his presence was still shaping history. Maris succeeded partly because opposing pitchers feared Mantle more, and that's the shadow Mantle cast, fear that extended beyond the box score, beyond the field, beyond the years he played. His influence didn't end with retirement. It multiplied. Mantle became the dream blueprint for the next generation, especially for kids who grew up with a radio pressed to their ear, letting the Yankees spill into their imagination. Reggie Jackson, who would become Mr. October, admitted he was listening as a kid when Mantle hit postseason homers and kept winning series after series. Jackson even called Mantle the original Mr. October, joking that he was glad the nickname didn't stick, but the point was clear. Mantle set the mythic standard for clutch, for October dominance, for the idea that the biggest stage belonged to him. Bobby Mercer, another Oklahoma native who followed Mantle to the Yankees, idolized him from childhood. Mercer's widow remembered that Mickey was Bobby's childhood hero and that the Oklahoma connection made it feel personal. But she also said something wider. Everyone of Bobby's age who loved baseball idolized Mickey. That is what television and radio did in that era. It took a player and turned him into a shared national figure, an early sports celebrity whose image traveled faster than most people ever could. And when Mercer was inducted into the Oklahoma Sports Hall of Fame in 1993, Mantle flew in to induct him. That's the long echo of greatness. The legend shows up in person, and suddenly the past isn't a story, it's standing right there. Ralph Houck, who managed Mantle during the championship years, summed up his value with the blunt certainty of a man who seen it too many times to doubt it. Give me the Mick in the clutch anytime. Gabe Paul described what made him special in terms almost impossible to quantify. Everything he did had that extra flourish. Jackie Farrell, the Yankees publicist, once defended Mantle as 1960 to MVP season when critics pointed out he didn't lead the league in home runs, average, or RB is by asking the question that cuts straight through the numbers. What did he lead the league in? Farrell answered, he led the league in manhood. Which brings us back to Bowie Kuhn's remarked the commissioner as stunned admission that baseball grew and expanded and cashed bigger checks and still never found another Mickey Mantle. The sport has seen faster runners, stronger bodies, more specialized training, more advanced analytics, but no one has combined switch-hitting power, blazing speed, grace under pressure, humility, victory, and courage through pain quite like number 7. Yes, he hit 536 home runs. Yes, he won 7 World Series. Yes, he gave 18 years to one team. But those numbers don't explain why grown men who played against him spoke like they were describing a phenomenon they didn't fully understand. The rest of the story lives in their words: fear, admiration, frustration. All because Mickey Mantle wasn't just a player you measured. He was a player you remembered.